It's been over a year since the whole Will Smith, Chris Rock incident happened. And I feel like now we should start having the conversation. Should Will Smith be forgiven? And I'll actually go ahead and say, spoilers to this video, but I think he should. Now, I'm making this video because I actually kind of forgot about the slap until Chris Rock did his comedy special. And he was kind of, it was his first public, real response to the whole situation. I honestly respect Chris Rock a lot more ever since that slap because it is crazy that he was able to take the slap, laugh it off, and continue with the job he was presented at the Oscars. And it was crazy. He wasn't asking for an apology. He didn't make a big public spectacle of it. He just lived life. I mean, I do think he talked about it privately with some of his friends, family. Like I highly doubt that he didn't go around his life without getting that question. Because if I was a friend of him or something like that, I definitely would ask him about, hey, what happened? But I've been seeing so many people like having this conversation about should Will Smith be forgiven or not. Here's one thing we have an advantage of. The one advantage we have is different from a lot of celebrity gossip is we do have proof. We saw everything that went on. We in multiple different camera angles in complete 4K live for everyone to hear and see. And so we have the advantage of knowing exactly what situation we're talking about. There's other actors that will have something that happens, but because we don't know exactly what happened, for us, it's like more complicated to come up with an answer. With Will Smith, it's the complete opposite. Now, let me first get my initial reaction to what I thought when I had first seen the slap, and then I'll give you what I think about it a year later because my perspectives have changed. But I do want to clarify, I'm always all about forgiveness as long as what you did wasn't completely evil. But that's always been my mindset. But anyways, with the Will Smith thing, I think Will Smith in the moment did one of the stupidest thing anyone can. One of my issues with a lot of men, and yes, I'm specifically saying men, is I think sometimes men can lash out of emotion because one of the issues with men as a whole with masculinity has always been hide your emotions. Now, I do believe that you need to, I do think that men should sometimes suck it up. I think you shouldn't be crying constantly. And this isn't just for men. I think this applies to everyone. I don't think you should cry about everything in life. Like, for example, if you're crying about something like once every week, then maybe that the issue is now you. But I do think overall you should be able to express yourself. I do think you should be able to share your emotion. But one of the issues with masculinity is that when you grow up, you're as a man and somebody. I grew up in a very traditional household. My dad taught me a lot of male values that I think every man learns. You're taught, hey, you do outdoor work. I was taught how to change a tire. I was taught how to look at a car. Everything. I was taught how to treat a woman. That I was taught the traditional way. And but one of the things my dad did install to me at an early age was don't cry. I remember anytime I would cry, my dad would literally like grab me by the ear and he'd like be like, "Hey, you don't cry. That's for girls." And I remember he one time sat me down and said, "Hey, you can only cry if you're like at a funeral." And I feel like that's too much. Like I feel like there's that balance. I think you should be able to cry when you need to, right? And I think you should be able to not cry all the time. I think there's that balance where, in the middle, where, because I'll see, this is one of the issues I also see in social media. I feel like one of the issues with social media is people share their personal lives too much. And I feel like sometimes you just see people cry so much online that I just think, why even do this? Like, and I won't say this person's name, but I remember there was this person on YouTube, this guy, this is an adult guy. And there was a time period where all he kept doing was crying on every one of his videos. And I just thought, that's just too much. And I'm not saying you can't express yourself. I just think you should be able to hold yourself up high and not make yourself a victim. Because I do think crying all the time will give you that victim complex. And I feel like sometimes in life you just can't have that mentality. You got to be able to suck it up sometimes. You got to be able to take a punch. But I'm sorry if I'm getting off topic. But with the men thing, that is true. I think a lot of men are taught don't cry, and I feel like it does affect them. I mean, there's no coincidence why men are more violent. There's no coincidence why men tend to get in a lot more fights or why men take insults more personally. There's been times where I've seen people literally fight each other for the stupidest reasons. Even me when I was younger. Back in the day, I used to get into a lot of fights in locker rooms and stuff like that because I was stupid. I was idiotic. And part of that, I think, is because I would take things way too personally. And with the Will Smith thing, I think what happened, looking at the clip, is Will Smith took this personally. I feel like it wasn't just he was mad at Chris Rock's joke at the time. I think he was mad at his whole situation, because I don't care what anyone says. I'm fine if you want to have an open relationship. I think that's all right. I just personally myself would never do that. The idea of an open relationship, the idea that your special someone's doing, what is supposed to be a significance of love to somebody else, right? I think that to me is just, I could never subscribe to the idea. And it's crazy because not only did Jada do that, but she also went out publicly with Will on interview and was telling everyone she's not satisfied with Will. And then even in front of him and in front of everyone talked about that publicly. And I also think that even if you are in an open relationship, I feel like if you're going to be in that, you and your special someone should clarify that from the get-go, from the beginning. And I also believe that you shouldn't make this kind of stuff publicly, right? It's like if a couple's going to have a threesome, you're not going to tell everyone about it. I feel like sometimes you just got to keep things, quiet. Not everyone needs to know your private life. And I feel like from seeing that video, seeing that interview, it always seemed like Will never really liked what Jada was doing. And it looked like he just didn't like this idea, but he wanted to stay in the relationship because, that is the mother of his children and all that. And I'm not here telling Will what he should and shouldn't do. I'm just saying that I feel like all of this, everything piling on him, led up to that breaking point because he had been made fun of. He had become a meme. And I feel like when he had heard Chris Rock's joke in the clip, and I don't know, I don't know exactly what was the mentality of Will at the time, but in the clip, initially he's laughing and then immediately he goes to slap. And I think what Will did was a beta move. I think that is a pussy man thing to do, right? And because one of the number one things I believe in being a man is being a leader. To be able to have people around you look up to you and you lead by example, right? You got to be the alpha. And I feel like part of being an alpha is not getting into fights that there's no point, right? Especially when it comes to just a silly joke, right? Because you got to know that Chris Rock is a comedian. At the Oscars, he's making fun of everyone. That's kind of their job. And he just made an innocent joke about Jada being bald, and that was it. Now, I'm not here to tell people what they should and shouldn't feel about jokes. If you feel a certain way about a joke, that's all right. But you also got to know what another person's intention is. Chris, from what it seemed like, obviously wasn't trying to do it in a malicious way. And I feel like Will should have been intelligent enough. Not only that, but I think if he had felt any personal offense towards the joke, don't get up and slap him, because it just makes you look like the weaker guy. Because what Will did do was a weak beta move. That is what weak men do. A weak man did what Will did, and that was physically assault someone on stage in front of the entire world to see, right? A real man in that situation, there's a couple of scenarios that could have happened. Number one, he could have sat down, just laughed it off, and then maybe after talk to Chris and be like, hey, I personally didn't like the joke. I do ask you, hey, in the future, don't say that type of joke, and just have the conversation. Another thing he could have done is maybe he didn't have to laugh. He could have just looked at him and been like, hey, not funny. Didn't have to say anything, just not funny. And I think it would have made him look like the bigger man. But unfortunately, that's not the scenario that happened. And I personally still hold this idea. But what Will did was stupid. It was stupid. There was no point in it. It didn't embarrass Chris Rock. It was just Will doing something stupid, because why not? And another thing I also believe about being a man is, if you are going to get into a fight, which you probably are going to. I've gone into fights before. I do believe in picking fights when the other person can also fight. You know damn well Chris Rock wasn't going to be able to throw down hands with you. Number one, he's in public. He's on a stage, right? Chris Rock, another thing was he wasn't expect. How do you even expect somebody to assault you there, especially someone like Will Smith? And another thing is Chris Rock is significantly weaker. Chris Rock is shorter, he's weaker, while Will Smith is stronger. He's worked out a lot. He's literally played Muhammad Ali. And to me, that is another pussy move. Being in fights that you know the other person can't respond to, unless like the other person's like doing something personal to you. But besides that, if you're in a real street fight, I just think that hey, you need to be able to pick a fight while the other person has a chance. And during this time, it's been like a year. It's been over a year now because it happened last year in February. Will did put out an apology video. I still think that is a horrible apology because he had like two different cameras. He was talking very slowly. It felt like he was reading this off like a script. But and till this day, I still argue that if Will wanted to make a genuine apology video, he could have just grabbed his phone, recorded himself simply being like, "Hey, I apologize." And I do one thing I do appreciate from Will was accepting the punishments. Like he wasn't gonna argue them. He wasn't gonna. I mean, yeah, initially he wasn't accepting it. I hated how he was virtue signaling when he was received his award for King Richard. I didn't like that he was asked to leave and he had apparently decided to stay, right? But after that, I did like that he was like, "Hey, I apologize to Chris Rock. I apologize not just to Chris Rock but to his mom." And he was saying that he's willing to take every punishment. He even said that, hey, if the Oscars are willing to ban him, he's willing to get banned, right? And that I appreciate that because I do think when you make a mistake, I feel like the only thing you can realistically do after is hold yourself accountable, learn from the mistake, and never do it again. That is what I believe in at the end of the day. I believe every human being is redeemable. Unless you're like someone evil. Like if you're a murderer or a rapist or a pedophile, if you're one of those things, you're irredeemable and you should be sent straight to the gates of hell, right? But with Will Smith, it was a stupid incident caused by a weak men mentality, right? And it led to what we got to see at the Oscars. Now a year has passed, and again, I respect Chris Rock for being able to hold off saying what he said publicly. I like that he was able to even make a joke about it even after all this. I appreciate that. Should Will Smith be forgiven? Absolutely. Because again, he didn't do anything that is so cruel, so heinous. People get into fights all the time. Right, and the good thing about this was a slap. At the end of the day, it wasn't a punch. He didn't knock him out. Yeah, it was stupid, but I feel like this is something you can redeem someone from. He shouldn't have done it. Should he have some type of punishment? Sure. Maybe not be able to attend the Oscars for the next few years. Maybe he lost out on a couple of roles ever since then. But overall, I think he got a punishment. I think it seems like he accepted it. He has not, as far as I know, has talked bad about Chris Rock. The only way I wouldn't have forgiven Will Smith is if he had gone out and said, "Man, I wish I had punched Chris. Man, I wish I had done something worse." Or if he was like justifying his reason for going up there, being like, "Man, I did it for my wife," or something like that. If he had done something like that, then yeah, I wouldn't have forgiven him because then that would be he didn't hold himself accountable and he's not willing to be mature about it. However, that's not the case. He actually accepted what he did, right? He accepted that what he did was wrong and stupid. And I'm willing to forgive him from this. I'm even going to say, I remember a couple months ago, I saw some people saying if the air gets released, will he even be allowed to be released because of the Will Smith drama? And I said, no. I mean, why should everyone be punished for something that happened a year ago? That was just stupid. Right? And I do think the Oscars do need to not allow him in the ceremonies for a time period because I feel like you got to use Will as kind of you need to use him as an example to be like, hey, if you do something this stupid, you're not allowed back in. And I'm fine. And I feel like Will's fine with that. He has his Oscar. He has his legacy. He has his entire reputation. I feel like Will is completely fine with that. But ultimately, do I think Do I think Will is irredeemable? No. I've met far worse people in my personal life. I've met worst. And I just think that I feel like another thing that society should also lead by example with is forgiveness. I feel like that never gets talked about. We talk about making people irredeemable. We talk about villainizing people, and I feel like one thing we need to talk about is forgiveness. I feel like everyone goes through a stupid time period. I feel like everyone does something stupid. I feel like everyone does something irredeemable, or not irredeemable per se. I'm saying something dumb enough that it feels irredeemable at the time, right? And I feel like everyone's done something dumb to this extent. And you know, it is what it is. I think I just don't see a point in villainizing Will anymore, especially when it wasn't something that serious realistically. And it's also something that really very few people were hurt from, and that hurt can be healed pretty quickly. Because I guarantee you, Chris Rock, like a couple of days after, obviously wasn't feeling pains anymore, unless like Will has some like super powered genetics where his slaps were that powerful and that strong. But I doubt that's the case, you know. But no, I believe in redeeming him. I think Will is all right. To me, he's completely fine in my books. I just don't see holding him hostage for eternity for this kind of scenario. But anyways, those are my thoughts. Maybe I'll break it down. Maybe some of the comments will agree, disagree. I don't know. You guys are more than welcome to engage with me. Comment section down below. Just wanted to talk about this. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you on the next one. Cap. Mess it up. Ciao.
Where do you go to? Where do you go? Where do you go to? I wanna know. How do you do it? That thing you do. Follow you blindly. I'll be your fool. Cinderella. I think I'll find your glass now.